Well, hi, Adam. We're glad that you're joining us and sharing with us about your book, Love Has a Name, and really dealing with difficult people. So welcome.
Oh, it's a huge honor to be with you today and just grateful to be asked.
Good. Well, you know, what I have found out is a lot of times authors write about things that have impacted them and affected them. And so tell me about a time of where you had to deal with a difficult person, or maybe someone a little bit different, and maybe you struggled with it, or you know, it caused some things to surface in your life.
Yeah, wherever two or more are gathered, difficult people exist.
Hey,
And
there
so
you go. Exactly.
even for me, in the honestly the last 24 hours, there's a person I've crossed paths with several times in the last few weeks that's just in a difficult person.
Hmm.
A person who actually stopped by my house this weekend, and I ran into him again last night, who's asking for help, and you try to help, and yet gets frustrated and angry with how you help. And it's
Right.
so one of those moments where it's like, I'm doing everything I can to help you, and yet this is still really difficult. And so even when we try our best to be a light to others and we do our best to love our neighbor as ourselves, it doesn't always go as planned. And I think now more than ever, with our world as it is, there's just a whole bunch of difficult people, and oftentimes we're the difficult person that we have to deal with.
Absolutely. So, you know, it seems natural. I know it does for me because I'm right with you. You know, I was helping somebody a number of years ago, and a homeless person, somebody, a transit was coming through, and he said he was hungry and he wanted money. And so I took him to this little store. And so I got a loaf of bread, and we went to the deli, and I said, hey, I'll take a pound of chip chopped ham. And he told me, he said, oh, I don't eat chip chopped ham. I'll take roast beef. And I said, you gotta be kidding me. You gotta be
Yes.
kidding me. And something rose up inside of me that wasn't pretty, okay? It wasn't loving. And so it's natural for us to resist people who are different from us and difficult. But, you know, just like in that instance with me, what do you believe drives us to resist difficult people or people that are different from us and they don't really respond in the way in which we hope?
Yeah, I think oftentimes we're kind of looking for a pat on the back when we go out of our
Uh,
way to help somebody.
uh-huh.
And then when they don't respond how we want them to, we really struggle. And oftentimes when we try to love other people, it's not really unconditional love with no strings attached. A lot of times we love somebody, and all of a sudden by doing so, we kind of put an expectation on them.
Wow.
It's like, now you're going to respond how I want you to respond, right? And
Right.
it's like, which is very different than the love of Christ, the love that Jesus has for us. I think the main reason that we resist difficult people and different people is we're just the selfishness of being a human. I mean, we
Right.
kind of want to do our thing.
Absolutely.
We got our plan for the day. We get annoyed when someone is slow off of a green light. It's like, okay, get moving, you know? And it's like they took 2 seconds to start. And so
Right.
I think just inside of all of us is really this me focused, me
Right.
centered, which is why it's so hard to sometimes do the most simple things. You know, Jesus is like, let's just make this really simple. Just love me and love others.
Right.
And yet
Yeah.
that's oftentimes the hardest thing to do.
Right. And I think, you know, and you allude to this, but I think maybe one of the reasons is because so many of us struggle with generalizing everybody.
That's
You know,
it.
putting people in a certain class. And what have you learned and have grown in about the importance of not generalizing people through our own lens or through our friendships or relationships?
That's such a good question. It is so easy to treat people inhumanely when you don't see them as human. You know, right now the election is here, and
Yeah.
everybody, and so Republicans, I just
Right.
can't stand them.
Right,
Or
exactly.
Democrats, they're all
Right.
the same. Well, they're actually not all the same.
Right.
And it's easy to like, well, they're this, they're that, they think differently than me, vote differently, look different. it's really easy to treat people inhumanely when you don't see them as human. But something changes when all of a sudden is seeing them just as a blur of faces. When you get to know a person's name and you get to know a person's story, all of a sudden it begins to change.
Right.
Even the person who's different than you politically, when you actually get to know their name and you know their story, all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's why you vote the way you do.
Yeah.
And actually, we might be very different in how we're going to vote and who we're going to vote for, but we actually have a lot of similarities.
Right.
Again, it's easy just to generalize and like, well, I hate that about that person. I always say on Sundays at the church I'm at, if we really asked everybody all kinds of questions and said we all had to agree on the exact same things, pretty much away from Jesus, all of us would disagree on all kinds of things. And so I think, again, when we can sit down, get to know a person's name and get to know their story, all of a sudden things begin to change. I just picture the grumpy neighbor next door who's uptight about his lawn, and you're just like, he's so grumpy. Like, I can see his blood pressure rise when my 4 kids come out front.
Right.
It completely changes when you find out that grumpy old man lost his wife of 40 years.
Right.
And he cared for her the last 4 years of her life.
Right.
All of a sudden you start to have feelings for him, and you're like, gosh, he's still a grumpy old man, but I heard it's his anniversary. And so maybe the same kids that annoy him, maybe we could write a card for him today and let him know. I mean, even the most rough around the edges person,
right,
when you find out even just an ounce of why they are the way that they are, the God inside of us begins to feel compassion.
Absolutely.
We just begin to care for this person. Even if nothing changes about them, something changes inside of us.
That's good. Well, I love what you have in your book. It's a powerful line. It goes like this. You said, Jesus shows us that knowing a person's story is the pathway to fully loving them. Yeah. Now, getting to know somebody can be difficult at times. So what are some of the ways in which you have found has helped you, maybe asking questions, that enables you to get to know somebody at a deeper level rather than just, making judgment calls because you see the surface thing in their life?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I think oftentimes it's as simple as asking the simple follow-up question. So the other day there was a man who, he is a low-income individual who stopped by my house. And I said, Bradley, are your parents, do they live locally? And I didn't know if they were even alive.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, my mom, she lives in this part of the state, and then my dad. And I said, he told me that. That's kind of the basic question. I was going to find out where he's from. And then I just said, are you close with your mom? And he went from being cold and kind of looking away to all of a sudden his soul just came alive.
Wow.
And he said this, he said, when she's not drunk, she's wonderful.
Wow.
And I said, really? And I said, would you tell me more about her when she's sober? Would you tell me more about her? And he began to tell me about her cooking, and he began to tell me, and his soul. And I'm just like, I wonder the last time was that he was asked about his mom, and then he got to share about his mom to somebody. Again, here's a grown man. He's older than I am.
Right. And
you could just see his heart warm. And then I began to just feel even more compassion for him, because I'm like, wow, I can't imagine if my mom was an alcoholic,
right.
And just even that he needed to distinguish that tells me a lot about him. Even just writing that simple statement. So sometimes it's as easy as that follow-up question. Other times it's just really being intentional to listen to what they're saying. Because you can pick up a lot. I mean, even from a cashier,
right,
of just how they respond. Like, how's the day going? Oh, it's going so well. That's different than like good. Really, so well. Tell me, like, what's so well?
Right.
And they go from just scanning things at Target, kind of like a robot, to all of a sudden it's just a warm soul moment. And then you hear, and then the coolest thing is being able to say, whatever they respond, like, I got a
Right.
wedding this weekend or whatever it is. Like, I hope you enjoy the wedding. And even better part is if you cross paths with that same person again and you can just simply ask, hey, how did the wedding go?
Right.
And what? Like the other day, I remembered a person's name. It was a single dad. And he said, you know my name? And
Wow.
I'm like, yeah, well, and I didn't, this was the truth. I said, of course. And I said, I actually prayed for you the other night and your daughter.
Wow.
And he just got, visibly emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, for me, that was just the simplest thing. But sometimes it's just that follow-up question or just really listening. For me, sometimes it's like, I don't have time to love people and I got whatever. Sometimes it doesn't even mean changing our schedule. It just means right now in this moment, I'm at Target and I'm checking out and this is my cashier. And so I'm going to treat them like a human.
Right.
Sometimes it's just being present. It's just being present in that moment instead of seeing them as a robot and like, would you hurry up with bagging my groceries or whatever it is? Just seeing them as a person with a soul made in the image of God.
That's great. That's powerful, Adam. So what have you learned and how has it impacted you? Because I can tell it has, okay? And I just want you to elaborate in loving people because, it's a powerful, powerful thing. And I know just by listening to your voice and looking into your eyes right now, that it moves you to talk about, because I'm sure that their faces are popping up as you mention them. How has your intentionality and choosing to love people changed Adam?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think that's just it. It's better to give than it is to receive. A wise man named Jesus once said that.
Absolutely.
And it's a true story. And more and more, I'm 38 years old. I feel like the longer I follow Jesus, the more that I think something is a big thing, oftentimes it ends up being a really small thing. Like I pastor a church and I've written books.
Yeah.
And God's like, oh, that's kind of cute and nice.
Yeah.
It's kind of a small thing. But these moments of just loving a people, things that I consider small things, God considers the big things.
Right.
And for me, like I'm this driven person. I'm an Enneagram 3 that just, doesn't sit still. And I'm like, I don't want to get to the end of my life and show God all the things that I think are big that are really actually small.
Mm.
And then not have the big things that I thought were small. Like I just think we get confused with what really matters in the grand scheme of eternity. And so really a couple of years ago, one of the things I began to do is each day just waking up and just saying, God, would you help me to find one person that I can serve today?
Wow, that's
one person that I can show kindness to
good.
today. Just one, one. And I've found that it turns into the highlights of my week. Mm. Normally you think of loving somebody as like, oh my gosh, another thing on my to-do list.
Yeah.
But what if it becomes the thing that gets you out of bed each morning?
Wow.
You have no idea who you're going to cross paths with. Even just one example, I've been trying to pray that prayer, and then any time that I feel like God is telling me to do something, if I have the ability to do it, I just try to do it. So this is about a year and a half ago. I woke up one morning, I was getting ready for work. As I'm brushing my teeth, I felt, this is gonna be crazy, I felt like God was telling me, go buy flowers for your friend Matt. I'm like, Matt is 15 years older than me. He has enough money he could buy five flower shops.
Yeah.
And he doesn't need flowers. Like, what guy buys another dude flowers?
Right.
So I'm brushing and I'm just like, no, that's a terrible idea. By the way, I got to finish my message to talk about you, God, which is a fairly important thing. And so, but as I'm brushing my teeth, I kid you not, it was like, go buy Matt flowers.
Yeah.
Go buy Matt flowers. I'm like, I don't want to buy Matt flowers. I get to my office. It's almost like I can't focus. It's so strong. And so I get to the point, I'm like, fine. So I go to a flower shop, I get flowers. And the whole time I'm like, am I really buying my friend flowers? This is weird. And then because he attends my church, I got his mailing address. And so I go to the house, I knock. It's not the right house.
Oh, wow.
And so I go out to my car and I'm like, oh my gosh, I know he lives in this neighborhood. So I start driving around a very high end part of town. I almost called the cops on myself because I felt shady just doing circles around the block. And then I realized I saw a flag. I know he's a hockey fan. And I'm like, that's his house. So I walk up, I knock on the door. His wife answers. I'm like, hey, kind of weird. I got Matt flowers. She's like, oh, thank you so much. Takes them. I go back to my office and all I'm thinking is, now I can finally get back to work. The whole time I was complaining.
Yeah.
Later that night, Matt calls and he says, hey, can we grab coffee tomorrow? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, hey, thank you for the flowers. Like, can we get, and so I said, absolutely. So I get to coffee that next morning. He says, you can't believe it. He said, yesterday morning, as I was getting ready for work, I got on my knees. He said, it's just been a really hard season that I'm in right now. I got on my knees. He's a new Christian too. He said, I got on my knees and I prayed, God, would you show me a sign that you care about me?
Wow.
Would you just show me a sign that someone sees me and someone notices me? Again, a very successful person. He's like, I don't know why. I've just been broken lately. Like I just needed. He said, when I came home and my wife said, you brought me flowers, it's quite possibly the nicest gift I've ever been given.
Unbelievable.
And I said, when did you pray? And he told me, and it's exactly, I'm a creature of habit. It was exactly as I was brushing my teeth. And all I could think was, and God to think I was complaining the entire time. And I said, Matt, this is going to sound really strange. I didn't want to buy you flowers.
Yeah.
And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, for 2 hours, I complained with God because I was so busy. And he got even more emotional. He's like, you're kidding. I said, I felt like I was being hounded to get you flowers. And I look back at that and I got, after we left coffee that next morning, I got emotional just thinking like, God, to think about all the things that I've missed out on my life.
Right.
Because I haven't been faithful,
Right.
because I haven't listened to the voice, even when I think it's foolish, like to think about all the amazing, that's a moment I'll never forget the rest of my life.
And he won't either.
Yeah. And I'm like, what am I missing? And so again, just that prayer, like, Lord, you tell me what to do. This fool, like, I'll do anything. And so like really how it's changed me is it's been the greatest source of joy in my life.
That's great.
And now I have these random friends, like Matt is a consistent friend in my church, but I have these random friends that I'll just be walking and someone, hey, Adam, how are you doing? And my wife's like, how do you know that person? And I'm like, well, Merle and I, we met in a back alley one night. And she's like, okay, enough said. So
that's great. Thanks for that's incredible. That's incredible. So what would you say to those of us who are listening to you, okay, on how we can begin to take some maybe baby steps, first steps, maybe we're not as outgoing as you are, and though we know that God and Christ has called us to love one another, it's just hard. So you're so bold, you're so courageous, you're so, I'm an introvert. How would you coach us or just say, you know what, here's a couple of things that you can begin to do if you really want to begin to love the people that comes across your path?
That's such a great question. I think one thing I would encourage you to do, specifically if it's new for you, is just to read through the 4 accounts of Jesus. Like that might be a weird place to start, but just to start looking at the 4 accounts of Jesus. A man that I look up to big time, his name's Hal. He started an organization called Convoy of Hope. He said in his mid-30s, he read through the accounts of Jesus 1 chapter a day for a year.
Wow.
And it ended up changing his life. And through COVID, I think he's helped through Convoy of Hope, has fed 110 million meals or something. I mean, it's just been crazy. of how many people, and he says that. So I think maybe just even start with the Gospels of just looking at the life of Jesus, of just like kind of what did he do? He saw interruptions not as interruptions, but as the most important things.
Right.
And he would often give attention to the least important person rather than the most important person.
Right.
So there's different things that you'll pick up there. And then maybe secondly is just that simple prayer of, God, would you help me to find one person today that I can go out of my way to love? And again, not everybody is going to sit on a street corner at a desk. I've got a random desk, and not everybody's going to hold a sign up on the edge of the interstate that says, I don't need money. I just want you to know God loves you. I mean, those are outrageous things. My wife's an introvert. She'd want to run and hide. but all of us, no matter who we are and how we're wired, can take 10 seconds
right.
to listen to the high maintenance coworker in the office place.
Right.
Everybody can write a thank you note to someone who's impacted their life. That's maybe just feels this nudge of like, gosh, I feel like I'm supposed to write a note to my high school math teacher. I don't even know why, but just to share the transformation that the impact they had on my life. I mean, those small things all of us can do. And I think so. I think begin to pray that prayer, and then just whenever you feel a nudge to say something, and it's life-giving, to do something and it's
right.
life-giving, you never have to wonder, is this from God?
Right.
Because it's clearly of God. And so if you're able to do it and it's life-giving, just to go for it.
Act on it.
And another thing I told one of my friends who really struggled with generosity, he's got plenty of money, but you can tell money's a little bit of a god in his life.
Right.
I just encouraged him one time. I said, Mark, I just want to challenge you with one thing. Because he's like, how do I do this? I want to be more generous. I was like, how about this? You just take out $300. For him, it was nothing. For another person listening, it might be $50.
Right.
It might be $2,000.
Right.
Take out $300, get it out in tens, and just keep it in your suit pocket. And he's like, okay. And I said, anytime that you have a way to bless somebody, whether it's paying for someone's meal, whether it's given to something, whether it's whatever, you just have it right there. Right. And that's just the beginning step, that act of like, this is what it looks like to be generous. You know, for him, $300 is peanuts.
Right.
But so often we always feel like we need to do all or nothing.
Yeah.
Like we either need to sell our house and move across the world,
right.
or we just keep doing our own thing. But what about just that initial step of like, I can do this, and it feels really good to do this, and it becomes the highlight of my day. And also just to define great acts, not according to us, but according to God.
Right.
Because it's like, but this isn't changing anything. But you know, what's buying flowers going to do for my friend Matt?
Right.
Again, he could buy the flower shop.
Right.
Well, it's transformed his life. I mean, I think honestly, his faith journey, that would be one of the key moments that he would mention.
Right.
Is I prayed, and God spoke so clearly I couldn't miss it. You know? Yeah. And so we want to define what great acts are. And so that's maybe another step as well. But reading through the Gospels, praying each morning, if there's any nudge or ability to show kindness to somebody, to love somebody, just to go for it.
That's great. And in doing so, you know, and you taking that nudge and running with it, you became the answer to Matt's prayer.
Yes.
And when we love like that, we'll never know, maybe until heaven, that we were the answer to their prayer for that day.
That's so good. One of the thing I would say is when you do something, again, don't do it with any strings attached.
Right.
If you love somebody expecting a thank you, or if you do something awesome and you're expecting recognition for it, I always tell people, make a really, really big deal about it. Yeah. Because before God, when we make a big deal of things, before God, he doesn't say anything.
Right.
God's like, well, you've already made a big deal about it.
Right.
But when in the Gospels, Jesus talks about the person who does things in the secret, like in a good way.
Right.
Like not letting your right hand know what your left hand's doing. God's just like, oh my gosh, I'm all about this. And he's just so pleased. And then the other thing is The seed you plant, what the good act that you do, the kindness that you show, don't expect it to grow corn tomorrow. I'm in
Right.
South Dakota. There's corn all over the place.
Yeah.
You don't see many farmers the day after planting corn standing out there like, well, when is this going to grow corn?
Right.
Like, why is there no corn out here? It's just dirt. I just planted corn yesterday.
Right.
Like sometimes it just takes time. And like what you said, we may never even see it on this side of eternity,
Right.
the impact that was made. But we might. And when in God's kindness, he often does show us those rewards of, like I'll never forget, there was I'm going to try to share this quick. I made chocolate chip cookies one day. I felt like I was supposed to make chocolate chip cookies. I didn't want to make chocolate chip cookies. My daughter, she helped me make them. She's like, Dad, what are we going to do with these? I was like, baby, would you want to make a sign that says free cookies? I set it outside. We went on, sat out the street corner and gave out chocolate chip cookies. The whole time I'm complaining about making these chocolate chip cookies. It's my day off. I don't want to make chocolate chip cookies. I want to relax. And so I'm making these cookies. In 45 minutes, they're gone. A year and a half later, and I didn't think anything of it. A year and a half later, not the next day or the next weekend, a year and a half later, there was a family that came to the church that's been trying to have kids, and they haven't been able to have kids. They show up with 3 foster kids.
Wow.
So they show up and they come to the service. As they're leaving, the youngest one, who's like 5, looks at me and he says, I know where you live. And I'm like, oh, he does. I'm thinking he doesn't know where I live.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's kind of cute. And he's like, I know where you live. And I'm like, oh, yeah. You live by my dad. And I'm like, oh, okay. Okay, that's kind of bizarre to say. And then his older sister said, and one day my dad and we stopped by and we got a cookie from you.
Wow. Amazing.
I said, what? And she said, and my dad always loves walking by your house.
Wow.
I said, what? And it was so crazy because that day when I sat out there, there was a girl that just seemed like she was in a rough situation. And when she walked away, I prayed for her. And immediately when she said, we stopped and got a cookie, I bent down and I knew it was her. And I said to her, that day I prayed for you. And she was like, you did? I said, I prayed for you. You're just such a beautiful gal, and yet it just seemed like you were going through some hard things. And I just prayed that you'd know that you're loved by God. And later that night, the foster parents reached out to me and they said, our kids can't stop talking about that you're the guy who gave cookies. And I said, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. And again, that was another moment that I just drug my feet. I mean, like a stubborn mule. Right. It was like God had a rope and he was like, get out on the street corner with cookies. But even that, like for a year and a half, if you would have said like, hey, remember that one morning? I'd have been like, yep, the morning I wasted 2 hours of my life.
Yeah.
Away from the time with my daughter, which was priceless, away from that, the moment that the day that I kind of wasted my morning. Actually, no, that was the morning that you met that gal. You prayed over her, and she just knows that God sees and cares about her. And so I think it's those smallest things that sometimes have the biggest impact.
Well, that's great, Adam, and thanks so much. Your heart for God and your heart for people is definitely evident. And so thank you for sharing with us that love has a name, and we can get that at Amazon, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
And
you can get it
bookstores.
Amazon, Walmart. Yep.
And so thank you so much for that gift, and continue to love people. And your life is challenging me to be able to do that as well. So thank you so much, and thanks for sharing with us.
Yes, well, it's a huge honor to be a part of your worship service today. And I pray for every person listening. I always say if God can use me, he can use anybody. And I truly believe when you begin to show people the love of Jesus, it ends up ministering so much more to you than anybody else.
Amen. Great.